This is an Edexcel A Level psychology question. Explain two weaknesses of classical conditioning as an explanation of human behaviour. Could equally well be asked for the international A Level exam, as that also has classical conditioning as a key explanation. So the key thing here to look at is that when the command word is explain, then there's generally two types of mark available. So for each of these weaknesses, there'll be a mark for identifying it and another mark for the justification of the weakness, which is an AO3 mark, which is quite a lot more difficult to obtain. So the examples that we've got here are classical conditioning cannot explain behaviours such as fear when an individual has not encountered the stimulus preparing to take place. That's the identification of the weakness. So this is then now getting into the justification. So it cannot be applied to a wider range of learned behaviour, unlike social learning theory, which explains the process of learning behaviour through observing the actions of others. So that's a kind of thorough justification of why that's a problem, why it doesn't work as well as an alternative explanation. And there's another one there. You can pause the video if you want to read it. Let's go straight to this candidate response from the examiner report. It jumps around a little bit, so I'll just read it out. Research into classical conditioning is usually done on animals in a lab experiment. For example, Pavlov's experiment with the dogs to see if he could classically condition them to salivate to the sound of a bell. This makes it much harder to generalize the theory to humans, as humans have more complex social interactions and complex brain structure. It's difficult to know whether they would also learn behavior through association. As lab experiments, it also lacks ecological validity, so cannot be applicable to everyday activities. Now, you might think that's gone into a second weakness, and one important bit of technique to think about here is whether you're sticking to the instruction of the question to just explain two weaknesses. But I think the examiner here has basically taken that as one point about generalizability and kind of external validity, whether the conclusions transfer beyond that research setting. Then we go into the second one. Classical conditioning doesn't consider individual differences as a factor. Some phobias are generated and formed from past experiences. For example, Munjak found that half the people developed a phobia of driving because they experienced a traumatic event in the car. However, the other half didn't develop a phobia, though they did experience car accidents. This suggests that individual differences play a role in learning behavior, and it's hard to simplify the theory to just people forming associations. Now, there's 4 marks out of 4 awarded here. The examiner comment is that both weaknesses have clearly identified accurate weaknesses for the AO1 marks, and then that's a nice example of really thorough justification. It's quite a long answer, obviously, packing the words in. You don't need quite that many words to get all 4 marks, but we've got really clear explanation of why those are issues with the classical conditioning explanation.